In this video, we're going to study together Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. And we're going to begin by reading the text. In Daniel 3 and verse 1, we read that King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. The first thing I want you to notice is the repetition of these officials. As we read the text, it was quite obvious that the writer is, by repeating this long list of officials, he's definitely up to something. And I think, first of all, what he is doing by this repetition is conveying the power of Nebuchadnezzar by the long list of officials who are serving in his kingdom. It also conveys the pomp and ceremony of the occasion. All of these different officials are assembled before the king. But there's also conveyed with the long list of officials the sense that there would have been a tremendous peer pressure to conform, because, as we would say, everybody else is doing it. But there is also a comedic, mindless element to the fact that all of these officials are doing exactly what the king has said in order to be considered loyal to him. And there will also be a repetition of musical instruments, which similarly also conveys the pomp and ceremony of the occasion, but seemingly mocks the mindless way in which the officials conform to the king's requests. So if we go to the next verse, we read in verse 4, then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So what we see with this repetition of the music instruments, along with the repetition of the officials, is a comedic, mindless conformity to the king's request for loyalty that is exhibited in the pomp and ceremony of the occasion. As soon as the music starts playing, it's expected that all the king's officials will bow down and worship this image that he has set up. Well, this is how one writer describes it. Havelos, in the comedic function of the enumerations of officials and instruments in Daniel 3, a fairly academic title, writes that the lengthy list is not meant simply to provide the reader with an accurate descriptive analysis. The lengthy list emphasizes the mindlessness of the entire Chaldean bureaucracy. Indeed, the list seems careful not to omit the most minor official. Everybody gets named. The four mechanical reiterations or iterations of a lengthy list of musical instruments we read in verses 5 and 7, but there are a couple more in verses 10 and 15. These mirror the mechanistic behavior of the pagans before the image. Indeed, as soon as the instruments sound, the pagans genuflect en masse before a lifeless image without a second thought. This is satire and perhaps even mockery. The point is that these officials, as soon as the music starts playing, they do the dance that the king wants. And that is conveyed by the repetition of all the officials, but as well by the repetition of the musical instrument. But Daniel's three friends stand in a stark contrast, however, as pious Jews. And we're going to see in verses 16 and 18, their response will inform us that they are only impressed with the true God, Yahweh, the only one who is capable of intervening in human affairs, and they would not dance to the music, they would not bow to the image that the king had set up. Well, what you're looking at here is an 8th century BC relief from Turkey showing musicians playing instruments, a drum, harps or lyres, and a flute. The list of instruments in Daniel 3 include horns, flutes, zither, lyres, harps, and drums. And Aubrey Buster and John Walton point out that there are Persian loanwords in the titles of the officials that are listed and repeated, and some Greek loanwords for the names of 3 of the instruments that are repeated. 3 instruments being the zither, the lyre, the zither or lyre, the Greek word is kitharis, and the harp, the Greek word is psalteron, as in psalter, really meaning to pluck, and the drum or bagpipes, or translated as in the NIV and some translations, all kinds of music, because it's an Aramaic word from the Greek symphonia, and symphonia means sounding together, something like that. So think of symphony. So something it's either a drum or bagpipes or something. It is just for saying all kinds of music. They're not sure entirely. But Buster and Walton suggest that together, the invasion of these foreign language words in the list of the king's officials and in the instruments for his ceremony show that despite Nebuchadnezzar's efforts, his kingdom would in fact be succeeded by other kingdoms, as explained to him in Daniel's interpretation of the dream. The next 2 kingdoms, of course, which would succeed Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom, would be the Persians, and they would be followed by the Greeks. Well, let me let Buster and Walton speak for themselves. They write, the list of summoned leaders is almost entirely made up of Persian loanwords, words in the language of the empire that would defeat Nebuchadnezzar. The list of instruments is made up almost entirely of Greek loanwords, the empire that would in turn defeat the Persians. The Judeans themselves are dressed in Persian costumes, according to the Scythian style. They are dressed in the garb of those who reveal that Nebuchadnezzar's empire is merely another humanly constructed thing. So the presence of these Greek loanwords is pointed to as evidence that in Nebuchadnezzar's statue that was going to be entirely of gold, right there, the very music that is being played is from another civilization that would, in fact, in time, succeed his. And amongst all the officials that are bowing down to his statue are these official terms that come from Persia, which would be another kingdom that would succeed him. So despite all his efforts, he really was only going to be that head of gold, and the statue would, as Daniel had told him in the dream, be a progression of empires moving from his until the kingdom of God would destroy them all. I should point out as well that the presence of these Greek loanwords for the musical instruments is pointed to by some scholars as evidence that Daniel was written in the 2nd century BC during the Maccabean revolt, that is during the time of the Greeks, and therefore it was not written during the Babylonian or Persian empires. However, Greek mercenaries and Greek slaves were in Babylon from even before Daniel's time, and they could have brought these instruments with them, and of course if they brought the instrument, the names would have made their way into the Persian language. As well, some of these musical terms are in fact found in Homer's writing from an early period, and given trade in the ancient Near East, it's quite likely that the Greek musical terms and instruments could have spread to Mesopotamia long before the conquest of Alexander the Great. So I think that would put to rest the argument that these Greek words mean that Daniel was written much later, if you're interested in those kind of critical questions. Well, let's keep looking at if we can go back to the text to verse 4. What we will see there is that the herald had told all the people assembled that as soon as they heard the music, they must fall down and worship the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And if they didn't fall down and worship, they would immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Now, I think this is how the world works. We are in the world in which we live, which is opposed to God's kingdom, and its way of thinking is quite opposite to the way of God. This world, the system that we are, as we live in this world, in the midst of, it seeks to pressure us to conform to its norms by bowing down to and worshiping its idols. And an idol is anything that we put before God. And that could be our work or our career and its advancement. It could be school and getting good grades. It could be any relationship, whether a family or a romantic relationship. It could just be money. It could be our image on social media. Whatever means more to us than God becomes an idol in our lives. And what tends to happen is the way the world functions is we are threatened with consequences that will affect these things that we value greatly if we do not comply with the world's expectations that we put these things first. For instance, if work is not our end all and be all, we don't demonstrate that at the office, we can feel like we're going to be passed over, we won't get that promotion. Or if we don't put our career in front of our family and everything else, we can feel like we won't climb the corporate ladder. Or if school is not the end all and be all of our lives, we won't get the grades that we need to get into the school that we want to go or to get the job that we would like later. And you could apply this to relationships or money or whatsoever. I think the point is that we can relate to Daniel's three friends as they're a part of this crowd where everyone is bowing down because they're told that if they don't behave in a certain way, then they are going to be thrown into this blazing furnace. Notice that although the whole ceremony was a test of loyalty, the participants were actually being required to bow down and worship. So it was not just about being loyal, there was also a religious aspect to this. And the Aramaic word that is translated worship in the text, segid, refers to the worship of a deity, and most likely that would be Marduk, who was the head of the Babylonian pantheon. Now the furnace, they say, the herald says, if you don't bow down, you're going to be thrown into the furnace. And it's likely that the furnace was in use right then and there. Perhaps it was being used to smelt metal for the gold plating of the statue, or it was being used to fire or bake bricks for the base and inside of the statue. So it was right there, and it was presently in use. It was in fact ablaze with smoke billowing from the top. So you're dealing with a situation where the threat is clear and present. Well, if we can think about what this furnace actually looked like, we're told from Stephen Miller in his commentary on Daniel, judging from reliefs, it would seem that Mesopotamian smelting furnaces tended to be like an old-fashioned glass milk bottle in shape, with a large opening for insertion of the ore to be smelted and a smaller aperture at ground level for the admission of wood and charcoal to furnish the heat. So if we look at this image, you can see that small aperture or hole at the bottom where the fire is kept blazing. The heat goes through the furnace, and you've got one hole where the bricks or the ore would be put to be smelted, and at the top you got I guess what we'd call something like a chimney that would enable the flame to and smoke to escape. As Miller writes, the furnaces of this kind would have had an opening at the top and at the side. The furnace may have been built on the side of a small hill or man-made mound of earth, enabling the soldiers to walk to the top and throw the 3 Hebrews into it. Later, Nebuchadnezzar would be able to look into the opening on the side and observe the 3 in the fire. So temperatures in these kilns could reach as high as 1,000 centigrade or 1,800 Fahrenheit. And you can just imagine how pressured and frightened these 3 Jewish youngsters must have felt with this blazing furnace right there. They could possibly feel the heat coming off of it as they were told, bow down or burn. Well, I think sometimes the pressures to conform to the ways of the world and to worship its God can also for us feel overwhelming. And the consequences for not complying can seem frightening. And I think we are to think of our own lives and the pressures that we feel to make compromises in order to succeed in this world according to its gods and the things that it puts as the priority, or to take a stand for our relationship with God and to not compromise. I'm sure each of us can think of situations we've been in where it's very difficult for us to make that kind of a choice. Well, in verse 7, we read, "Therefore, as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up." What we're dealing with is an elevated peer pressure situation. This is everybody else is doing it. The text actually says that as soon as they heard the music, everyone bowed down. And we're not told anything about Daniel's 3 friends. We're going to be introduced to them a little bit in the story. But what is set up is a scenario where everyone else is conforming. And that's when it's hardest to take a stand for God, because then you're going to stand out. And you've got the music blaring, and music, of course, would affect emotions and would have interrupted their ability to think clearly. So we have a combination between a party scene, political rally, herd mindset, and religious cult ceremony all rolled in one. A scenario in which individual will and reason are being overcome, not just by the group, but by the music and by the whole scene. And so to do other than was expected was to swim upstream and to stand out. However, unlike all the other officials or nations or peoples of every nation who were polytheistic, and therefore they would see no harm in adding the worship of another god to their pantheon, their group of gods, Daniel's 3 friends lived according to a different standard. They were called to the exclusive worship of Yahweh by their own faith and religion. And I'm thinking here of Exodus 20 verses 1 to 6, the first 2 commandments of the Decalogue or the 10 commandments. And there, God, we read, spoke all these words to the Israelites assembled on Mount Sinai. "I am the Lord," that's Yahweh, your God, "who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below." That includes Nebuchadnezzar's statue. "You shall not bow down to them or worship them," which they were being asked to do. "For I, the Lord, your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commands." That command would have made bowing down to the idol set up by Nebuchadnezzar a problem for Daniel's 3 friends. Whereas it was okay in the pagan religion of their neighbors to worship several gods, Daniel's friends could not worship any other god alongside Yahweh. Now notice, they were not being told to stop worshiping Yahweh. They were being told to put this other god alongside Yahweh. And that's, I think, what we even today can be tempted to do. Not to stop going to church, not to stop reading our Bibles or to do good things, but to put alongside our worship of God, alongside our prioritization of God and His will, the things that everyone else in this world worships or lives their lives for, to elevate those things alongside God. So yes, I serve God, I go to church, but really just as important to me, or maybe even more important than God, are these other things that everyone else in the world around me worships. But that option was not open to Daniel's friends, and it's not open to us if we're serving the God of the Bible. He says that He's a jealous God. He says that He's a God whom wants our exclusive devotion and will not share us with anyone else. And so our lives as Christians are to demonstrate an exclusive devotion to and allegiance to the God of the Bible, which stands out and even requires us to make difficult and unpopular choices. We're to be known for this kind of devotion and allegiance by those around us, not just for being a Christian or going to church. Well, in our next video, we will study together Daniel 3, verses 8 to 23. I look forward to your joining us then.